Always got to remember to unmute myself first. And we are live here on Plus One EXP's Roll for Content actual play channel. We're doing a late night session. Normally we stream in the afternoon, but the reason we are streaming this evening is because on Prestige Class, we try to sit down with a designer whose work we've been following, who's somebody's stuff we've been looking at, who we want to learn something from, that I'm interested about, that we want to invite other people to kind of check out. And tonight our guest lives on the other side of the planet, which means we have to do it in the evening. It should be kid friendly, as far as I know. I don't have anything unkid friendly planned this evening. So unless Keil just unleashes, some sort of crazy, anti-kid rant, I think we should be okay. But
slang, the swear words.
We're joined tonight by Kiel Adam of Run Right Play. I'm incredibly excited to sit down with Kiel here on Plus One EXP. Our hope, our desire is to help designers find great players who love their game, help players find great designers whose games they can love. And Kiel's been talking a lot in a couple different groups that I'm a part of about visual design, Elflord, the Right Run Play project, the releases y'all have been doing of some real honest to goodness magazines, and pulling together some great content and conversations around design. So I'm very excited to sit down and just chat with you. But it is early in the morning for you. It is 7 p.m. here on the East Coast. It is 7 a.m. There. So I've got a beer. Maybe you have a beer also too. I don't know how they do things in Australia in the morning. But Kiel, go ahead and tell people who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you, man. Yeah, I've got my bowl of cornflakes with beer instead of milk. Now I've got a coffee. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Yeah, my name is Kiel Adam, and September 2020, I founded Run Right Play, YouTube channel, and it's become sort of a little indie publishing house, just sort of a creative brand, which I'm branching out into a few things. And yeah, as Tony said, one of the things we've been doing is some honest to goodness magazines, which is super exciting. I got a limited print run of the first 3 issues this week and started sending them out to patrons. So yeah, very exciting. Yeah, I've like Tony said, I do some game design, some sort of storytelling. I do some freelance writing and editing, and I've started dabbling, thanks to Canva, in visual design and yeah, working with my wife. Actually, she's been doing a lot of the layout work on the magazine, but I've been dabbling in some of that stuff myself. Yeah, just generally embracing my creativity, which I had sort of let slip through the cracks in favor of corporate dronery for most of my 20s. So now I'm in my 30s and I'm rediscovering my creativity and really embracing it and driving for it. So
awesome. Ready to leave the hive and go out into the big brave world of creative independence. No, I'm really excited. Hey Acer, good to see you also too. There are a lot of cool streams happening right now. And so I'm super excited for everybody here who's joining us. But if you're screen bouncing, I totally get that also, because it's a lot of what I'll do at night also too. But Kiel, this whole conversation started around us chatting. You'd posted, asking people how they design. Like, do they quickly jump to like sketching things out? How do people take notes, other stuff like that? I want to get into some of that conversation, talk about what you're doing at Run Right Play. But I also just like to start with people at the very beginning of just saying, like, hey, most of us like playing games. Like, some of us design games, but designing games is oftentimes like, Joe DeSimone shares a comic a lot of the time that's like, hey, do you think you're good enough to be a game designer? And the answer is no, I'm just too dumb to stop designing games. But a lot of us play games because we, I'll turn Kiel up a little bit then. Apparently you're a little quiet. But I guess I could also turn me down a little bit, get us right about the same level. But
check.
you were asking this question about visual design, but we all start usually playing games. I don't know of any designer who jumps straight to just making them without playing them, though I'm sure that designer exists. Tell me about how you got started in playing games, playing RPGs.
Yeah, so my gaming roots, I suppose, go back to the old Commodore 64 back in those days for the computer game side of things. Maniac Mansion was an old favorite of mine when I was a very young kid. And then so it's in terms of like gaming milestones, one of the big game changes for me, which I know was for a lot of people, was the Hero Quest board game. That was just before I knew anything about role-playing games. That was my introduction. I was born in '87, so I missed a lot of the the original stuff in the '70s and '80s, and it was not until I was in my early teens that I was introduced to D&D itself and role-playing games, like tabletop role-playing games, and it was like, it just made sense to me. It was something that I'd always been looking for, I suppose, and without realizing, having that precursor of Hero Quest, and some other. I've always really loved fantasy, like the Choose Your Own Adventure books, the fighting fantasy things. My brothers and I were really into them. And so you can sort of see the progression there, waiting to discover tabletop role-playing games, which already existed. I just hadn't found them yet. So, yeah. And I also actually, in my early teens, was really into text-based role-playing games. Okay. So some of the, text adventures, the solo stuff, but especially some of the online multiplayer MUDs and mushes and things like that. And that was where I really cut my teeth on getting into role playing in character and, doing the dialogue and emoting and all of that kind of stuff. And that's where a lot of my joy from the hobby comes from, is really the stories and the characters. And I always love, the combat strategy or, some mechanics that I can really sink my teeth into. But if there's no sort of narrative substance or character or story sort of substance to it, then I can tend to become a bit unenamored. I don't know, what's the word?
It's easy to fall out of love with it real quick if there's not something that's a little bit more there for you to do than just like, hey, like let's because it's one thing, like if I want to win something, if I want to play a tactical game, there are plenty of great tactical tabletop experiences I can have that aren't role-playing games. If I'm going to sit down to play a role-playing game, I'm looking to do, at some level, even with the most OSR thing in the world, some level of free-form conversational engagement around who my character is, why they're doing things. I think even in the most OSR mindset, where player and character knowledge may be right up next to each other, I still want to sit down and have something of a lens for why is my player doing the things that they're doing right now in the way that they're doing them, but also have the freedom to act in a certain way. And you mentioned both fighting fantasy and choose your own adventure. We were talking right before we went live. I do think it's interesting. Like, people, there is a UK RPG scene. I'm reading through Warlock's Black Edition right now. Today was originally going to be a double interview day, but I rebooked one of them because my son had his first track meet today that got moved from yesterday to today. So I needed to move. Greg Saunders is going to be on next Monday. Come back and watch then. Who created Warlock? And Warlock is obviously influenced by fighting fantasy. A lot of old school British games are influenced by the fighting fantasy books and their kind of conceit. But you have fighting fantasy, you have the choose your own adventure books and Dungeons and Dragons that are entrees for a lot of people in the US. Does Australia have something like that's present in its own culture? Because I think a lot of people, like, there are a lot of crossover touch points for Australia with the UK and with the US. It also has its own culture, but I also know not every place gets the thing, right? The thing that kind of helped build the pipeline. Sometimes we're inheriting them from somewhere else. So what are there some things like that in Australia that really helped build the game scene, whether recently or historically?
I love the term that you use there, entrees to D&D or right, to the wider hobby. That's a really great way to put it. There's been a role-playing scene here, like you say, sort of anything that happens over in the US or the UK tends to sort of happen here, even if it's on a microcosm sort of level. And so I think Australia, didn't miss out on the original stuff happening in the sort of 70s and 80s. But in terms of some of those entree precursors, I haven't heard of some of that stuff you're talking about. So I think some of it is not as ingrained over here as it is here. Like definitely the choose your own adventure or the fighting fantasy books were big over here. But I suppose what I can say is, because I live over in Western Australia and Perth is the capital city, and that's where I live. And I've never actually bothered to look it up and have it cross-checked, but it's sort of touted as the most remote capital city in the world. So
yeah.
we're far from, all of the other capital cities on the other side of the country. So like geographically remote. And so we do, when bands come over here to tour, often they don't bother coming to Perth. Like there's things with hobbies that don't necessarily make their way over here in the same way they even do in the eastern states for us over here. So, but what I've noticed in recent years, happily, is that we've had a lot more local gaming stores and just a lot more presence of D&D and role-playing games in general. So obviously, especially D&D, that's the biggest, most popular, most well-known one. So, but even like 5-10 years ago, it was a very, very specialist thing. Like there was a couple of places that you could go to get that stuff, and now there's more local gaming stores and even just general book and gaming stores are now stocking dice and D&D books and even a lot of indie stuff. So which is pretty exciting for me as an indie creator. I have that hope that locally I can take some of my products in there and see if they'll stock them. So as I say, I'm only just sort of starting out, but yeah, that's something that 5-10 years ago I wouldn't have had the same sort of opportunities to try and do.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, like I said, it's always so interesting when you talk to people around the world about how gaming has evolved within their context, what's popular, what's not. Again, Dungeons and Dragons is always going to make those rounds, but then what are the local influences? What are some of those other pieces? And how have people responded to that culture? I think for a lot of people, like we have this vision of Australia as the kind of place adventures take place, and not as much of, and lots of people don't even understand, like Sydney is on one side of the country, Perth is on the other side of the country, and it's not like it's a quick trip between the two. They're not like right next to each other. It's a very large island with a lot of space in between, with not a lot of stuff in some parts of that space. So no, like I said, super excited to have you on tonight. I was just kind of curious about how some of those things had evolved. But let's talk about what got you into designing. You said you had just come out of kind of the corporate world. I think a lot of times when people are sitting down to play games, we're pretty quickly hacking games, trying to do different things with them. But what was the moment where you started thinking, hey, I'm going to make something either for a game you were playing or as a standalone piece to play?
So it's an interesting one. I only had the realization very recently, like within the last 12 months, that I've always been game designing, in a way, even from back when I was a kid, playing Super Smash Brothers on Nintendo 64 and just on paper scribbling out my own levels and characters with what moves they would have, when you press certain buttons. That was just something that I always did, and always coming up with games using dice or cards or whatever. So, and I didn't really think of it at the time, but that's a realization I've had recently that, yeah, I've always been inclined with that. And again, there was a pretty big period there where I didn't, where I just sort of let that fall off. So it's been exciting to have that realization and re-embrace it. But in recent years, it's been, what would it have been when I, So even in my early teens, when I first discovered Magic the Gathering and D&D and things like that, I've just always been inclined, like you were saying at the start of the stream, to I was playing the games, and some people have that just natural inclination to homebrew or design even as part of your enjoyment of the game. And so I always was coming up with my own like homebrew classes and magic items and that kind of thing. And then in recent years, I've just started sketching down ideas for it's branched out from 5e content to my own dice systems, my own games, completely bespoke stuff, and as well embracing having the landscape, like a movement, for example, like Powered by the Apocalypse, the PBTA, like microcosm, like that movement is having these frameworks like that where someone like myself can you leverage that stuff to bring an idea or a concept to life. You know, it's one of the things I really love about this hobby and tabletop games in general. It's thinking, you know, compare it to on one end you've got like schoolyard games, right, where it's literally just sort of rhymes or rhythm and dancing, or, you know, sitting around playing duck duck goose or something. That's a game that's not written down anywhere. The rules are just kind of passed down verbally. And then on the other end you've got really high intensity video games, for example. And then in between there, I see role-playing games somewhere between there, you know, and more towards you can have them where a game is just some words. You know what I mean? That's
Right.
one of the big differences, but that I love about this hobby. They're more intangible than video games. There's an awesome documentary series I saw on Netflix called High Score, and that follows some of the roots of the gaming industry, including video games, and just some of the stuff they talk about there. The story of Doom, the original Doom game, how it was like a handful of creators that created it over a year, I think, and they distributed it on floppy disks, and just the way they were talking, like they had the game all figured out, but then they had to code it, get art, all of that. And that was a big realization for me with tabletop games, once you get to that first point, that's the game done. Like, you can get art, you can make it a nice, you know, polished product, printed and everything, or it's just some text, and that is the game. It's, you know, it's some rules and some ideas and conveying them to people. So really embracing that and playing around with what a game can be. Like on my Patreon, I make some I'm dabbling at the moment with like some postcard sized games, and I think, did you participate in one of the jams on Itch for like a business card sized game?
I did not participate, though I have purchased or downloaded a lot of the Business Not Pleasure Jam games. Yes, I'm a big fan of the Business Not Pleasure thing. I remember when is it Sean from Caverns of Heresy was sharing around kind of their initial design for their game, and then it eventually ended up as a jam. And just had some really, really great things that came out of that. One of my favorite that came out was the generic trading card game one, or basic trading card game one, that now has its own jam that's been spiraled off of that. And I've always wanted to, at conventions, make some sort of game out of trading business cards with each other. And so I loved watching that entire process develop. But yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, and that whole aspect of the hobby, and I mean the industry to an extent is Itch. I'm only just starting to discover that, and, you know, the jams that they have on there. That's I'm going to set up an Itch store and or, you know, an Itch account, and that's what I love doing, like collaborating and remixing games and having those you know, specific design briefs, I suppose, where you have these certain parameters and you can just go nuts within it, you know. Yeah. So I'm really keen to start getting into some of those jams.
Love it. Yeah, no, jams I think are a tremendous thing. I was the guy who for like a year and a half signed up for tons of jams just to follow them and never submitted anything to any of them. And then Troika Fest, which we just hosted a little while ago, I did a submission for, and we're still polishing and increasing that. For one of our games, Beards and Beyond, we're going to be doing a jam coming up. We're finishing up the SRD for that right now, and are looking forward to seeing what other people can do with it. There's like just being able to turn content over, and it is really interesting. Like we've talked a lot, you mentioned a lot of times, like kind of the some of the analogs between video games and RPGs, but one of them, and jams come out of the coding culture, right? Like, it's like, let's all get in and just like take a theme and jam around it. But it is also one of the unique things in tabletop culture where it's like, hey, I made this system, I wrote this concept, I have this piece of tech right now, but also like, hey, if you want to use this or do something with this, take it, use it, do it. I would love to see people do other stuff in the games. For the most part, not everybody feels that way, but we see way more that it's like, yeah, if you want to make a PBTA game, like email Vincent Baker, like, and get his permission to make a PBTA game. A lot of other games are, you know, just open source or by attribution or other things like that. And you look at things right now coming out of the brain trust, like Tech Jam, where it's like, hey, if you've designed something but didn't do anything with it, or if you've just got a piece of design that you do really like and is a piece of like a how to roll dice, or a piece of tech that you use, just post it up in this jam and just let other people see these kind of cool techniques or mechanics or other pieces of concept that they might be able to build into something else or use in their game. So I love seeing that collaborative nature to the TTRPG scene that I think in a lot of times in coding, especially when you're dealing with like, hey, here's the project I spent 3 years on, and the code is a very important part of that, and it's how I make, like, nobody's going to be like, go ahead and just take the code and like, it's fine, you're good. It's a little bit different of a process. So it is one of my favorite differentiating factors between the two things also too, is we can be a whole lot more free because the bell curves are there. Like, like you may be doing cool things or interesting things thematically, or you may be sequencing mechanics in a really interesting way, but you're probably not inventing something. Like you're probably modifying or hacking or reworking something, unless you're creating new materials to play with or using materials in a very distinctive and new way. And so, I love getting to see those kind of things take shape live in front of us in the community also.
Absolutely, yeah. And just the accessibility in terms of, or the barriers to entry. You don't need to know how to code. You don't need to know how to do graphic design or anything like that to make a tabletop game. So
you can export a Google Doc to a PDF and upload that, and it can be like,
I've done that before,
and that's fine. Like, and you might have somebody who comes across it and who loves it and who's like, hey, I want to do art for this, or I want to work on this with you. And those are some of the coolest moments, is just to see somebody do it. Right now, Spencer Campbell is doing a really cool thing. Spencer created Light, had created a game that was launching, that was Warframe kind of flavored, that there's only one live stream of that game that ever has existed and ever will exist, and it's on our channel. You go check it out if you want to, before people got really worried that the people who made Warframe were going to run out of money. He took and he released the Lumen SRD, the system reference document for how he builds those games, and a lot of other designers have picked it up and have started designing their own video game inspired content using the Lumen system. And he's been hosting conversations with them and talking to them about different great like ideas for how to do this, and some of them are using it very directly. Other ones have made significant modifications to it. But it was also, I think it may be the first system reference document, which is what SRD stands for anybody out there watching. It was number 2 in the itch store for physical games at one point in time. Like, tons of people went and downloaded it and looked at it and checked it out and were excited about it. And he also did a lot more graphic design and layout and other elements to make that SRD really sing, that I just think was super sharp and really clever and made people want to pick it up and make something with it. But being able to say, I've written the code, you just have to put a skin on the outside of it, or saying it is actually a real gift to people who may have a lot of great visual ideas but may not know how to do the design part as well. So I'm super excited for that. Let's talk about that. Like, visual design is a lot of where this conversation started. You'd done a post, I think it may have been in the Absolute Tabletop group one day, and it was, an overhead lay flat of a notebook that had a couple different notes scrawled in it, and then it just said like Elflord at the top, right? Yeah, that
this guy
right there, yeah. And I was like, I don't know where this is. I can't decode your handwriting, but I would love to know more about Elflord. And I'd love to talk about kind of your approach to design, the ethos, and some of the visual design elements that you incorporate. So tell people who aren't familiar with it yet, what is Elflord?
So Elflord is a roguelike tabletop roguelike game. So if you've ever played any roguelike computer games like NetHack, ADOM, Hades in more recent years, Binding of Isaac, there's hundreds of them now. That's what this is based on. And to me, the pillars of a roguelike are sort of procedurally generated content, like locations, usually dungeons, and the monsters and the loot are all, randomly generated as well. Often there's a permadeath element involved as well. Even the Diablo series are roguelikes as well, which are massive inspirations for me. Again, going back to my gaming roots. And so I actually was watching Matt Click of Absolute Tabletop and A Fistful of Dice streaming some Hades games on his Twitch channel. And well, actually, it was while I was at my day job, just listening with one ear, and I just kept getting. It was one of those things where I just got some ideas, and I just had to scribble them down. So really embracing the analog creativity and note-taking side of things. I just find that writing it on paper just helps me sort of get it down better and brainstorm and jam a bit better with my ideas. So yeah, that's the page. I just started scribbling down some things and came up with this concept of a dice mechanic for threat dice, which at the time was using the dice chain, so stepping between D4, D6, 8 up to D20, and pairing that with some D20 roll tables. And so you'd roll whichever size dice you were using at the time, depending on the threat of the area. And then obviously, if you were in a low threat area, you'd only have a chance to get results 1 to 4, excuse me. And that's kind of where it started. And yeah, just some design pillars of what I wanted, like fast-paced gameplay, fast-paced character advancement, even weaving in some elements of games like League of Legends, where the character advancement is, you get some items and sort of upgrade them, and you have that path, and every playthrough is its own distinct thing, and then you reset, start again, and have another playthrough. And so that's kind of the idea there. But Elflord itself is, the concept is you're an ancient elven lord, and it's an ungendered term, and you are delving into basically the elven equivalent of Moria to reclaim it from the shadow spawn that have taken it, So it's literally a game where you delve in, fight baddies, reclaim your ancestral home, and fight a final boss when you get to the end. And which final boss it is randomized. The whole thing, the idea will be that it's sort of generated through the random tables as you go, and it's a sort of map making exercise with a sort of narrative element. You can lean into the narrative side of things as much as you want, like we were talking about earlier. You can just sort of play it as a, pretty not cold, but a pretty
strategic,
like
or tactical,
strategic, mechanical, going through and just doing the thing and trying to get the highest score you can. Or if you want to lean into the the narrative side of things, you can as well. It'll be primarily a solo game, but we've got a task there to come up with some co-op rules as well, because I think that'll be really fun. So no, that's quite abstract description there, but
no, but it sounds like a blast. Like, and we've seen people try to do. We've seen a lot with roguelikes over the course of the last couple of years. Like, there is a desire there to say, how do we create a rich play experience with something that we can sit down and not know what's coming, but still have a general idea and take some of those roguelike elements, incorporate them over play. There's been a few that have come out that have been really solid. There's been a whole lot of other ones where it's like, here's an idea, but I'm not, we're not 100% there yet. And so I love getting to hear about those from time to time from people who are, engaging in that type of design and looking for that kind of, experience, because it is one that, I know that for a couple of my kids, they'll sit down and if we're playing a role-playing game, like, they'll get totally into it. Other ones are way more about the tactical side. And if I set them down with something like that, they would play for hours trying to maximize out how far they could get and could get the highest score. But may not be concerned super intensely about what are the narrative elements also too. So no, I love it when I get to, you get to kind of see that bending and that blending. Like, if you had to name a couple of things that are part of your design ethos, like that are part of how you approach games when you're designing them, like some people it'll be like, what's the question you're asking, or, you may have these pillars of design, certain people gravitate toward things. What are those things for you? Like, what are some of the things that you, every time you sit down to design, feel like, hey, here are a couple key elements in the way that Keil designs games?
Yeah, so I definitely go for one of the first things. I usually jot down are design pillars. And what I've come to recently is leaning into the idea of game design it's design, it's like interior design, graphic design, anything like that. You're working to a brief. And so I'll set myself that brief, and it'll be a fluid brief probably, but I have an idea of what I want to make or what the inspiration is. And so with this, the brief was, simple, versatile game, fast-paced play, and then, you know, a list of the inspirations. So setting those parameters, you know, it's like the jams where you've got those parameters, and, you know, creativity happens within there, and innovation even, you know, can happen within there. So that for me is a big one, the brief or the design pillars. And I'll often as well make, you know, not shy away from acknowledging and really drawing from the sources of inspiration, you know, similarities. Like with this, you know, drawing from Hades, Diablo, and other roguelikes, I'll take notes, you know, I'll do a bit of research, I'll play some of those games again, and literally jot down any notes that I have, any ideas. And even sort of taking it a little bit broader, one of my big things is, which is, you know, a habit that I've had to build. It's a good habit, but it can be, can take some happening to build, is even when I'm not sitting down at the table ready to sort of design or work on a project, you know, it's that setting myself up for success and making sure I either have a notebook with me or, you know, the notes on my phone, and getting into that habit of, I have an idea, no matter what I'm doing, quickly pause, get that idea down. And that is just a massive help for my process, you know. And then next time I do sit down, I've got those ideas there, because my memory is horrible. It's always been awful. And so that's just been a massive thing for me. Setting myself up for success, I suppose. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I think, you know, looking at how people actually track through their ideas is always interesting. Like for me, it is the running Google Doc of ideas. And if I don't get an idea down within the first like 5 or 6 minutes that I have it, like, I mean, I can spend a long time simmering over it, but whenever I'm ready to stop thinking about it, if I haven't written something down, the likelihood that I'm going to come back to that idea dramatically decreases, right? So like I can go on an hour-long walk and not make a note, but when I come back, if I don't actually sit down and say, all right, here's the design concept I was thinking about while I was on that walk, I will lose it and have to come back and do that work again another time. And so I totally empathize with that. Tell us a little bit more about Run Right Play and these magazines that y'all have been putting out. You know, you've got these kind of 3 magazines that you've put out that are kind of these. Well, tell us a little bit about what they are, because I think I have a general idea, but I don't have a specific idea. So tell us a little bit about these 3 initial volumes and what you're trying to achieve with the Run Right Play magazines.
Yeah. So it was, so Run Right Play is sort of the creative brand from September last year, and from January this year, 2021, is when I started doing a monthly issue. A pretty bold undertaking, and that's tied to the Patreon. So it's because of my patrons that I'm able to generate these, not just from the financial backing, I suppose, but which helps fund the print runs, but also because they're collaborative zines. So the idea is that they're collaborative zines for indie creators is the idea. And so they're filled with content of all kinds. There is quite a lot of tabletop role-playing game content and adjacent sort of content. Every issue has, so the first issue here has got like a one-shot kit, which is like a print and fold pamphlet style format for cyberpunks. So there was always like some gaming elements in there, some world building elements. There's articles and stories and lots of art as well. And I always have in there, there's a monthly creative challenge as well, where there's, again, setting some parameters. It's kind of like a jam. We set just some creative prompts, and in the Run Right Play Discord server, or anyone who wants to submit some content for possible inclusion as a contribution, they can do that. So we had like poetry and original art and short stories and things like that in these first 3 issues, based on that creative challenge. And that's the idea, that they're a collaborative thing, that they are a platform for people to be able to, you know, have some of their content published, you know, for independent creators. We've got, short stories in there. This is Kura Longsword, that's some original art drawn by John Sugg for a character in Vagabond, my Iron Sworn collaborative story that I run on my YouTube channel. And so that's one of my patrons, Asus in the chat there, Kenya. She was inspired by that campaign and that collaborative story to sort of write it in short story format, you know, like
chronologically.
What's the word? Chronicling.
Yeah.
Chronicling the story in, you know, like beautiful prose. And so she's been contributing that, and that's been put in and laid out. It's grown from one page initially to, you know, this awesome laid out thing where her writing's in there, you know, and she's getting some of her writing published because it's awesome, and that's what it's all about. It's a platform for me as well to get, you know, publish some of my little game ideas or some of my writing, and yeah, it's very much meant to be made by indie creators for indie creators. It's got little inspirational quotes in there and things like that as well. So that's the idea behind it.
Awesome. Now, I like I said, it's such a cool thing to see, and we're seeing a lot of design communities kind of pop up here and there, and you know, some of them they're in Discord, some of them are on Facebook groups. But I also think one of the great things is when you can actually say, "Hey, we've created this community, we've created this system of support, but we also want to do something with that and invite the community to respond to it." I think there's something deeply resonant with the role-playing experience around that. You know, if you as the GM, if you're like, all right, here, you know, like where, you know, you're you know, hundreds of feet below the earth, and you can feel the pressure above you, and you can hear the dripping water in the distance, and then all of a sudden you hear a low, like rumbling growl in the distance. Like, what do you do if the players just sit there and don't ever respond? Well, then, like, it's not a game. Like, it is that point at which you've said, like, here's the scenario, here's the setup, here's the idea, here's this thing we could be doing. And then when actually people respond with, all right, well, here's my idea. Like, here's what I want to do with that. I want to chronicle this game that you've been playing. I want to write a poem. I'm gonna, you know, create this cyberpunk one-shot piece. You know, there all those different things coming together. That's where the game takes place. And I think we're at our best as a community when we're able to see some of those collaborative things actually come into existence. You know, there's the Brain Trust, a community that I'm a part of. There's this great experience there where lots of times somebody will throw an idea out of like, ha ha ha, like, wouldn't this be funny? And then somebody else is like, oh man, I actually really love that idea. And then there'll be this back and forth conversation with a couple other people hopping in and you know, sharing ideas. And then all of a sudden there's the premise, the outline of a game that's present there. And sometimes somebody will take that and then go make that game. And that's one of the coolest things about that collaborative and open process is being able to throw it out, watch it resonate, watch other people respond to that, build it into their ideas, even saying like, oh, no, that's not exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking, you know, this over here. That clarifying process is so important for design, and oftentimes is, I think, missed in a lot of other areas of game design, like tabletop RPGs, again, specifically, seem to be something that we're all really comfortable sitting around and saying, how are we building this together? At least I would say for most indie designers and publishers, maybe not with some other larger ones, but I think that's such a huge part of the RPG scene and what makes it special. So, no, what are some of the plans we have coming up for Run Right Play? What are some of the things you're looking to do as you continue to kind of grow what you're doing at the brand?
Yeah, so continuing with the monthly zine, the April issue is coming up to being nearly finished, and there's a digital copy every month and a print copy as well for those subscribers. I've got Elflord, which I'm working on as well. I am collaborating with Lloyd Collins of Jarl DM and Skald Publishing on Blood and Ink, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game about scheming factions and the people who run them. And so that's a way to sort of live out your best Game of Thrones life, I suppose, at the table. And we have a playtest packet for that being released imminently, end of this month or maybe early May. I'm working on a bunch of stuff. I'll be publishing as well. One of the things that has always been the vision for Run Right Play, you know, which you can see in the zine, but through the zine, but is also just helping indie creators bring their ideas and their works to life. So I'm actually publishing through Run Right Play a product called 5e Background Delve, which is written by Nicholas Jaquette, which is a bunch of D12 roll tables for one table for each of the character backgrounds in the 5e Player's Handbook. And it's just a bunch of extra little, narrative prompts or backstory snippets that you can add a little bit of depth to your character. And again, he wrote that in a Google Doc, a bunch of tables. I've edited it, proofread it, and I'm laying it out, and that'll be released as a cool little 5e supplement. Making some games every month as well, which are usually included in, which are always included in the zine. And this month I'm making 2 little postcard-sized games because the Patreon poll was a draw. So I'm making 2 games instead of 1. And again, jamming on those with my collaborator patrons. Just a bunch of other. If you join the Discord, or if you check out any of my my stuff in the details that you've linked below there, you can see the projects that I've got going on.
Yeah, send me a link to the Discord, because we'll make sure we get that down in the show notes also too for the YouTube. Michael King watching over on Facebook says that they're super excited about the zine also too. I think, again, it's one of the things we talked about early in the show. People are just joining us, but it does sometimes seem like we're willing to pay $17 for something from the UK, but we have a hard time doing it from Australia a lot of the time. And I do sometimes wish there was a service that just helped be like, all right, we will send you can send all of your zines here for 6 months, and then we will put them in a bundle and ship them over to you all at one time. And yes, it will be more, but it would be less than you would pay independently, because there are so many good new things coming out of Australia. And I know tons of things in Australia that people would love to get access to. But the postal rates are challenging. I think most of the things I backed this last year from AUS, I backed on a digital level just because I want to pay postage. And so,
absolutely.
But there's so many great things. And the concept, we've talked about it with Nerves. We've talked about it with a few other projects out there, supporting things like conversations around game design that are actually printed, bound, and put out. You can kind of tell the health of an industry by the amount of physical publications that are dedicated to it. And I love seeing more and more of those pop up around game design, specifically in ttrpg game design. So I'm super excited for the work that you're doing. Tell people again one more time where they can find your work at, some of the best places to do that.
So you can check out my YouTube channel as youtube.com/Kiel Adam. I will be migrating that over shortly to Run Right Play branded YouTube channel. Everything else is Run Right Play on social media. So the patreon.com/Run Right Play is where you can check out. I've got some behind the scenes live streams for doing live game design on Elflord and a bunch of other projects that I'm working on. So if you want some behind the scenes stuff or to be involved in some of the collaborations, I collaborated with my patrons on making these little postcard games this month as well. So if you want to get involved in some of that stuff and support what I'm doing, then that's where you can check it out. And the Patreon as well is the way that you can subscribe to the zine. So for $2 US a month, you can get a digital subscription, or $18 US a month, you can get the print subscription. And that includes shipping. So check it out.
There you go. That's awesome. If you want to support us here on the channel, again, Plus One EXP, we're a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. Our hope and desire is to help great players find indie games that they can love, help indie designers find great players who love their game. If you want to support us, you can go over to coffee.com/plus1exp. That's KO-FI, and support us by becoming a content champion. We just started that this month. In a couple of weeks, we're going to announce a few different giveaways. We get extra copies of games all the time that I give away on Twitter, but also we're going to start doing some giveaways specifically for people who are helping support the channel. We don't charge designers anything, obviously certainly for an interview, but also when we do polished reviews, when we publish different content that's specifically designed to help publishers get the word out about their game. We don't charge them just because we don't think, for one thing, small indie publishers don't have a advertising budget typically. and we want to make sure that they can get the same kind of support that we give to any size publisher, from the very biggest to the very smallest, that they all have support for their games. So when you help us do that, when you help support us, you help us support indie game designers and getting their games out in front of people and supporting their campaign launches. So please, if you get a chance to do that, please go do. If you're watching us on Twitch, there's a link down below. But this has been Prestige Class with Kiel Adam of Run Right Play. I encourage you guys, please go check out the magazine at patreon.com/runrightplay and follow everything they're doing at Run Right Play across social media. Kiel, it's been such a great time having you on today, and we'll look forward to talking to you more in the future, and would love to get, you say, is it Blood and Ink as a PBTA game you have coming up?
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get that back on and maybe do an actual play of it sometime this summer once you guys are ready for that. So I'm looking forward to doing some more stuff with you in the future. But until next time, this has been Prestige Class with Kiel Adam, and class is dismissed.